point, I don't get what Joey's plan is for this company. The animations sure aren't being finished on time anymore, and I certainly don't see why we need this machine. It's noisy, it's messy, and who needs that much ink anyway? Also, get this. Joey had each one of us donate something from our workstation. We put them on these little pedestals in the break room to help appease the gods, Joey says. Keep things going. I think he's lost his mind. But hey, he writes the checks. But I tell you what, if one more of these pipes burst, I'm out of here.
I don't think it's a stretch to say that Wally Franks was a fan favorite prior to chapters 4 and 5. Despite not appearing on screen a single time, he was one of the most recognizable out of the cast. Whether that be his phrase, "I'm out of here," or his personality, or the fact that he had several audio logs across multiple chapters, he was influential at the time. Bits of him snuck into song lyrics and fan art. Even now, there's a multitude of interpretations of Wally, including highly detailed and well-made cosplays. But our favorite, less evil janitor has quietly disappeared. He's no longer someone that people consider important. Why is that? What happened to Wally Franks? Wally was introduced in Chapter 1 through the original version of his audio log, as played at the beginning. He was the only other character besides Henry who had a voice at the time, which made him stand out a bit. In the audio log, he gives the player a little bit of lore about the reasoning of the pedestals. Depending on which direction they go in first, it could also serve as a hint about the next objective. We barely knew who this employee was or what he did. The only impression we got was that he disliked the inner workings of the company. He was also aware of the ink machine, which didn't seem like an important fact at the time, but we'll return to this later. In the next chapter, listening to his audio log outright triggers the next objective. In the log, he rants about how he can't find his keys that open the closet next to Sammy's office. Interestingly, on June 25, 2017, theMeatly tweeted the following: "Why would Wally leave his keys in the trash for 30 years? It's almost as if he never got a chance to go back for them." So, what did we know? Well, we knew he disliked the company, was clumsy enough to lose his keys multiple times, and doesn't seem fond of Sammy. Then, Chapter 3 hit. If you played through this chapter normally, you wouldn't think this section was important. He got, 2 audio logs? They didn't even talk about something game-changing. But let me tell you, the theorist side of the Bendy hype train was excited. But let's start at the surface, yeah? Keep things smooth and in order. During the initial release, Wally only starred in 1 audio log in this chapter. In it, he, again, rants about his job, but this time he talks about his coworkers. He sees them as too pessimistic and angry, even though to him they should be happier because they get to work on cartoons. He comes off quite tone-deaf and blatantly insensitive. Either he is more concerned with himself, or that particular log came before his first one. However, this audio log wasn't the main star in the eyes of the theorists. Far from it, in fact. The main star was our pal Boris the Wolf. It was heavily theorized that that specific iteration of Boris was Wally Franks. On August 11th, 2017, as part of the Chapter 3 reveal trailer, the team decided to release their first cartoon featuring the Bendy characters, Tombstone Picnic. It's very interesting, but the part we'll be focusing on is our beloved wolf. In Tombstone Picnic, Boris eats the sandwich from Bendy's picnic basket. Despite Bendy poking at him and trying to get his attention, he straight out ignores him in favor of eating the sandwich. When he gets sprayed with the bottle, he gets angry and is about to chase him down until the basket lands on his head, finds the sandwich, and continues eating. Boris is portrayed as self-centered and a bit of a glutton. He ignores the things happening around him until it's his problem, just like Wally. But that's just a cartoon character, and I will admit the cartoon isn't that much like Wally. Sure, he's tone-deaf, but he isn't that absorbed in himself. But that is just the cartoon. Let's take a look at the real deal. Throughout the chapter, Boris is implied to have skills with multiple tools. Firstly, he has his own toolkit. Then, later on, he takes the flashlight from Henry, travels through a vent, and opens the door for him. When they reunite, Boris has a gent pipe. Additionally, we get the impression that they are both cowardly or at the very least cautious, Wally's catchphrase being, "I'm out of here," but also the fact that he's concerned about Sammy finding out about the lost keys. Boris, on the other hand, is shown to be afraid of the dark and cowers when the ink demon is near. It wasn't a perfect theory, but it was a decent one. A decent theory that suddenly became very, very believable in the next update. The Chapter 4 update was huge, to say the least. Not only did it have 2 boss fights, the reveal of lost ones, and a new type of scripted event, but it majorly added to the rest of the game. For example, Gent Corporation was made more relevant. Near the ink machine loading dock, you'll find a board describing the ink output schedule signed by Thomas Connor. Speaking of, he and Wally got an additional audio log together in a new location in Chapter 3. This is the first and only audio log throughout the games that feature 2 characters. In it, the 2 bicker as Tom tries to teach Wally how to maintain the pressure of the pipes. Tom is aggravated that Wally isn't getting it, and Wally argues that he shouldn't be doing both of their jobs for him. Because of this audio log and the sudden inclusion of the Gent Corporation, it was speculated that Wally was also an employee of Gent as well. But that's not all this update had to offer, oh no. When you first make your way to Bendyland, you'll find Wally's 5th audio log. To summarize, he complains about how the employees play games while he has to clean up after them. They get stuck in the back room, which causes him to go down there to help out every day, and he suggests they hook up the doors to the games. Side rant, but I could talk about this specific audio log for hours. It's such a perfect representation of Wally's key characteristics. It even shows how Wally can be smart when he wants to be and when it benefits him, but it also shows his laziness and willingness to cut corners when possible. But before I get too ahead of myself, let's talk about that Boris theory again, yeah? This chapter was pure fuel for the flames, or the theorists in this case. At the end of the chapter, we get our first look at another version of Boris as well as a second Alice, who we later on figure out are Tom and Allison. But before Chapter 5 was even released, people snooped through the files and figured out their names. This information made the theory just make sense in a way I don't really know how to describe. It just did. The 2 voice actors for Alice were both Alice's, and the 2 known mechanics were both Boris's. And that even extended to 2 separate theories of Joey being the ink demon and Henry turning into a perfect Bendy. It all just clicked, even if there wasn't a whole lot of evidence. Though this was the start of Wally's fall. And fall he did. But let me ask again, who was Wally Franks? Well, there are a lot of things you could say. He was a cautious man who knew the ink machine. He was upbeat, but when things started affecting him, he would rant and complain. In all honesty, he was a bit of a brat. He was smart, but he slacked off, cut corners, and was a klutz. So what did Chapter 5 offer to the table? You'd think that it revealed something important or tie him even more to Boris or Thomas or Gent. So what did we learn? Well, in his last audio log of the game, he reveals that he stole a chocolate cake from one of the offices, describing it as a perk. So he's greedy, at least when it comes to food, right? Well, it also says that it was specifically at 2 a.m., so I guess that implies Wally works the night shift. In all honesty, this wasn't really any important information, at least compared to his previous logs. And also, none of this was exactly surprising. And then, the ending. There aren't enough words to describe the amount of hatred the ending fills me from a Wally enthusiast standpoint, and by no means do I think the ending is bad in any way, shape, or form. Confusing, yes, but I don't hate it. I actually like it. But my god, the amount of damage one note could do. In the ending, we are seemingly in the real world, in Joey's apartment. To the left, there's a board with multiple papers pinned to it. One of them is a letter written by Wally Franks. It's a reply to Joey, and in it, he reveals he's currently in Florida with his wife and his grandkids. This letter has single-handedly destroyed Wally. People took this letter and ran. People took this as confirmation that Wally wasn't in the studio anymore, that he wasn't Boris, that he wasn't important, even though Allison also writes him a letter and mentions Tom, 2 people who are confirmed to be in the studio. But it isn't just the letter that caused Wally to become forgotten. He was just overshadowed by the other more important characters. characters who had actual screen time outside of just audio logs. But the final nail in the coffin involves the Boris theory, a theory that still had weight to it. It almost felt canon. Until September 3rd, 2019. Let's turn the page and reveal the true identity of Boris, the nail in Wally's coffin. September 3rd, 2019. The team brought along the skilled actor and writer Adrian Kress to write the first book of the Bendy and the Ink Machine franchise. I know, but the books are actually incredibly well written and are deeply rooted in canon lore from the games, so stick with me here. I plan on writing a full analysis about the books later on, but right now we're focusing on Wally and Boris. Dreams Come to Life is written in a journal-like format from the point of view of Daniel Lewick, also known as Buddy. To skip to the end, Buddy and his co-worker Dorothy, also known as Dot, try killing the ink demon. Buddy and Dot manage to get him to fall into a trapdoor that starts filling with ink in an attempt to drown him. Thinking they succeeded, Buddy turns his back but is grabbed by the leg and dragged into the inky depths. Dot desperately tries to save him, but Buddy lets go to try and save her. He feels the ink entering his mouth and nose and several stabbing pains in his leg and back. He dies at the hands of Bendy. And then he wakes up. Sorta. Buddy describes it as waking up in stages. The first time, he was confused. He didn't know where he was, his environment was off, his hands had more sides than normal, and the person in front of him was, as he put it, shaped strangely. The second time he woke up, he writes, it was his own mind. He remembered everything, and the person standing before him was none other than Joey Drew. And soon, something dawned on our protagonist. I stumbled backward. My shadow was long and thin as it always was. It bled over Mr. Drew, now standing up, no longer cowering in fear, watching me closely. He was curious, not afraid. He seemed to be understanding something I wasn't, something I was about to figure out. I touched the top of my head. What was that in the shadow? Two tall, curved points that seemed to be growing out of either side of my skull. They were soft to the touch, and when my fingers felt them, I felt my fingers. These points were a part of me, as much as my arms or legs. And turning around, Buddy sees his corpse. Throughout the book, Buddy refers to a him, and as it's been revealed, that him was Boris, the character he's been forced to share his mind and body with. To throw out some other quick points, the seeing tool reveals the words, "I'm sorry, Buddy," where Boris usually is, such as his posters and in his sanctuary. I'm pretty sure Boris in the Dark Survival also enforces this, although I haven't played the game for myself. And speaking of... this segment will be relatively short. On February 10th, 2020, Joey Drew Studios released a side game called Boris in the Dark Survival to keep fans at bay while they worked on Dark Revival. It's received a couple updates since then, but we'll just be focusing on The Wolf Trials, which was the first update, and it released on March 6, 2020. In The Dark Survival, Wally has 2 audio logs. Firstly, it confirmed that Wally was not an employee of Gent. In fact, he generally held contempt towards the corporation and its employees, especially Tom. He also talks about a time where he was trying to mop up a puddle of ink, however, he struggled.
So here's where the weird starts. I was mopping up some of Mr. Connor's spilled ink in that little room he calls a laboratory. He can call the laboratory all he wants, but it used to be the employee coat closet. Anyway, there I was mopping. But that puddle, I'm telling you, it kept moving this way and that way like it had the smarts or something. If these messes keep being like this, I'm out of here.
Yeah, that's normal. Although this is sort of old news, as something similar is talked about in Dreams Come to Life. What is surprising, however, is that Wally was the star student in high school. This next part would be too short to talk about in its own section, so I'll just mention it here. On July 30th, 2019, the Joey Drew Studios Employee Handbook was released and written by Kala Spinner. The handbook is essentially a guide to the game that clears up some of the gray areas. It also confirms Wally's role as a janitor. Additionally, in the real-world version of The Illusion of Living, released February 2nd, 2021, written by Kress, Joey briefly mentions Wally in a conversation he had with him. He describes Wally as a self-starter and as someone he respects. And then there was the next book. a book that inspired me to start writing video essays about Bendy and the ink machine. And it also reveals a side to Wally I don't see anyone talk about. The Lost Ones, released on December 7th, 2021 and written by Kress, starts with a prologue that didn't need to exist. That could have been written from the perspective of Thomas Connor, or hell, replace our narrator with Norman Polk and you'll still get the same experience. But Kress writes from Wally's point of view, and it is only in the prologue that he has a role in this book. I'd seen it all. I'd seen everything. Oh yes, old Wally sees everything, including the machine, including what made the ink on the floors, what dragged it far down the hallways and along the walls. You didn't think old Wally had seen it? Old Wally sees it all. I went into his small, tidy office and picked up the half-full bin, tossed the garbage into the bag, and paused at the little light on the desk. I leaned over and clicked it off, saving electricity and all that. Then I went back out into the hallway, kept going about my business, into the light for one moment, and into the dark. Never understood why folks are so scared of it. Ain't nothing in the shadows that isn't there in the light. Except, of course, when there is. And when there is, I'm outta here. What? I don't know how, but Adrian Kress added layers upon layers of depth to Wally Franks in only 6 pages, which is almost laughable when you look at everything beyond Chapter 5 of the original game. And by the way, this isn't the weirdest thing he says in the prologue. Throughout the prologue, he makes strange remarks. Hell, his first words are the following. Late nights were my favorite time of day. I liked the empty halls, the darkness, no people running about like chickens with their heads cut off. It's just a job, I'd think to myself. Why do they have to get so worked up over a job? That was written on the 2nd page. And not only that, but on the next damn page he says this! Now, that's not to say there weren't strange things about working late, but if old Wally knows one thing, he knows that folks like having their little secrets. Makes them feel special. Never understood that myself. What you see is what you get with me. There were secrets here in Joey Drew's studios. I ain't no fool. But I also ain't no detective. So I just keep on my own business. Even when the new renovation started, when they bought up the theater next door. Even when the pipes had begun making strange noises all hours. Sometimes almost like some creature moaning away somewhere. It was all never mind for me. Made life interesting. New halls to keep up all swell like. New offices, and, sure, new sounds too. What is up with weird, creepy male janitors whose first initial is W? Anyway, Wally, as characterized here, is basically a second Norman Polk. He likes the dark and overhears conversations in the studio, especially conversations he's not supposed to hear. Additionally, he also is aware of what's going on in the studio, and flat out admits that he doesn't care. That is, until it bothers him, as shown by his audio logs. Another thing that happens in the prologue is his conversation with Tom, which, may I say, is one of the most tense conversations I've ever seen in the Bendy franchise. It also adds a new, interesting light to their dynamic. All in all, what the hell, Wally? What the hell? At this point, you may think we have covered everything about Wally Franks, but there's been one detail I haven't talked about. Wally's ties to the ink machine. Remember earlier how I said that him knowing about the ink machine wasn't important at the time? Well, let's put this into consideration. Throughout all the games and the books, it's made clear that the ink machine and anything relating to it, including Bendyland, are tightly held secrets. So why would our dear janitor know about it? Well, the easy answer is that he overheard it. But that would be wrong. And in the next and final section, we'll wrap this up as we go over the most overlooked part of Wally's character, which is also one of the most forgotten parts of the lore. When looking at lore deep dives, there's always something missing. And trust me, I've looked at quite a few. Whether that be on YouTube, TikTok, Tumblr, Twitter, or somewhere else, there's always been that one detail that it seems to have been forgotten. It has to do with Wally and his ties to the machine. You know how I said earlier in the first segment about how, during the initial release, Wally knowing the machine wasn't really a big deal? Well, with new context from the games as well as the books, it definitely is a big deal. A really big deal.
Whatever that grinning thing was I saw wandering around your office, you better keep it locked up tight. I realize it was a first attempt, but imagine if the press caught sight of it. Might scare off investors.
Yeah, so those Gent Corporation boys are kind of strange. Every time I come back to work, they put in even more of their pointless gadgets. Last week, they built some kind of, I don't know, electrical towers over near Animation Alley.
Something funny's going on around here. Call me suspicious if you wanna, but I know the signs of weirdness when I see them. It's starting to feel less like an animation studio around here, and more like some crazy scientist's laboratory. It's just plain weirdness.
But turns out something really wrong is going on in this place. I mean, I've seen dead people before, but here, death is like a way of life.
Anything even remotely related to the machine was a secret to anyone outside of Gent and Mr. Drew himself, so why would our dear janitor know of it? The easy answer is to say he's overheard it somewhere, as the Lost One sets that up perfectly. And while that would have been a valid answer, it's also not the correct one. You see, there's been these two textures that I guess people have either forgotten or ignored. The first one can be found as early as Chapter 2. It's the plans for the ink machine, going over its different parts. It also provides some descriptors for each part that's labeled, and it seems like it's some sort of manual. It also details the people involved. On the bottom it says Repair Murray Hill, and to the left it says Client Joey Drew Studios and Attendant Wally Franks. That's fine. Yeah, it totally makes sense for the janitor to be in charge of the machine. No, it's all good. But yes, Mr. Franks operated this machine. But that would be way too simple too, wouldn't it? Because the creator said, what if we made Wally Franks one of the most complex characters who is connected to one of the main plot points of the franchise, only to not do anything with him? Because this man designed the ink machine? I will never shut up about this. Do you know what this means? Wally is complicit in everything to do with the ink machine. Why does no one else talk about this? As I was saying, I'm surprised that more people don't talk about this part of Wally. It makes you wonder about him. Which job was Wally really hired for? Why doesn't he care about all the strange happenings? It also explains a little bit too much about his behaviors, especially the ones presented in The Lost Ones. So what now? Who is Wally Franks? How would you describe him? Well, here's my answer to that. Wally Franks was a mysterious man employed as a janitor and as the attendant and designer of the ink machine. He was very clever and a good problem solver, but he was also very lazy and cut as many corners as possible. He complained a lot and was a bit tone deaf to people's own troubles. He also appeared cautious, but he couldn't care less about the horrors within the studio and was also a bit of a klutz. He knew about the horrible things going on, but he didn't feel the need to do anything about it himself. He was involved in those crimes after all, even if he never committed them. He was quite tone deaf and often pushed people's buttons, but at the end of the day, he was ready to up and leave at the drop of a hat. It's unfortunate about Wally's decline in popularity, but I understand why. There was always a newer, more interesting character. I admit even I forgot about Wally for a period of time because of characters like Audrey. And that's fine. Wally had his turn in the spotlight. He was even featured in the joke trailer of Bendy Royale as a tape recorder with a hat and a knife. Hell, even in Dark Revival he got a note and a couple of Easter eggs too. I just wanted to write a comprehensive review of him. He was one of my favorite characters from the original, and this is more or less a love letter to him. I might have missed some things. While I'd love to consider myself one of the biggest Bendy fans, I'm not perfect. Hopefully I did Wally some justice, and now I can focus on another character for a change. But this was fun. Maybe I'll make another script about another character like Sammy, Thomas, or Henry. I will say, I'm currently working on 2 other scripts. One going over all the books in the franchise, and one going over MatPat's Dark Revival theory. Oh, and speaking of, before I end this, I just wanted to give a few special thanks. Firstly, to my friends who watched me rant for hours about this dumb guy. Secondly, to the few YouTubers who inspired me to make this. The game, film, and food theorist MatPat, the horror analyst and theorist Super Horror Bro, and the horror artist and reviewer Pastra. They are all amazing YouTubers with really good analyses on various things, and their content inspired me to make my own video. Well, now that that's over, in the words of Wally Franks, I'm outta here.